When she read the federal civil rights lawsuit, I watched her hands shake like autumn leaves. But when she saw the arrest warrant, Margaret Thornfield collapsed right there in the community center. This is what happens when an HOA president decides to mess with the wrong guy's family heritage. See, they demolished my grandfather's bridge. 70 years of family history, hand-carved railings, solid cedar beams. While I was in Washington, D.C. presiding over a federal court case, they thought they were dealing with some old rancher who didn't know his rights. They had no idea I'm a sitting federal judge with contacts in the FBI, Treasury Department, and enough legal firepower to turn their petty power trip into 18 months of federal prison time. The smell of fresh-cut cedar still hung in the air when I got home, mixed with diesel fumes from their demolition equipment. What would you do if your HOA destroyed something your grandfather built with his own hands? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Let me back up and tell you how this nightmare started. I'm Judge William Morrison, a Bill to my friends, and I've been on the federal bench for 12 years. Not the kind of guy who goes looking for trouble, but apparently trouble found me anyway. I inherited this 15-acre ranch from my grandfather back in 2018, just outside a little Colorado town called Sunset Hills. The property's been in our family since the 1960 S-Win. Grandpa bought it for practically nothing because it was all cattle country back then. No McMansions, no HOAs, just rolling hills and the sound of wind through the sage. The bridge was Grandpa's pride and joy. He built it himself during the winter of 1952, connecting the main house to his workshop across Willow Creek. Hand-carved railings, mortise and tenon joints, the whole thing built to last forever. Evening air carried the scent of sage and the gentle sound of water over creek stones, and the creak of those wooden planks under your boots. That was the sound of coming home. I'd been spending more time at the ranch since losing my wife Sarah 3 years ago. The place became my sanctuary, my connection to family history, my escape from the brutal world of federal criminal cases. There's something healing about chopping wood where your grandfather chopped wood, walking the same paths, listening to the same creak. Then I met Margaret Thornfield. Maggie, as she insisted everyone call her, was the kind of woman who measured her neighbor's grass with a ruler. 52 years old, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, drove a white BMW, and lived in an $800,000 McMansion that looked like every other house in her development. She'd been HOA president for 8 years, which should have been my first warning sign. Her husband Stan owned a local Ford dealership, you know the type. Loud ties, louder voice, thought money solved everything. They were the power couple of Sunset Hills, the kind of people who called the cops when kids rode bikes too close to their perfectly manicured lawn. The first shot across the bow came while I was in D.C. for a major federal case. Certified letter, return receipt requested, all very official looking. The letter claimed my bridge was a non-conforming structure that affected neighborhood aesthetics and property values. It demanded removal within 30 days or the HOA would take necessary action to protect community standards. I'm reading this thinking, what community standards? My property predates their entire development by 40 years. But here's where it gets interesting. I called my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, and she told me Maggie had been out there with a clipboard, taking pictures and measurements like she was conducting a federal investigation. That Thornfield woman was prowling around your bridge yesterday, Mrs. Chen said, her voice tight with worry, taking photos from every angle, writing notes. She looked angry, Judge Morrison, real angry. I tried calling the HOA office, got nothing but runaround from some secretary who clearly had her talking points memorized. Maggie never returned my calls. Instead, I got increasingly threatening letters, each one more demanding than the last. The scratchy sound of my fax machine at 2 a.m. became the soundtrack to this nightmare, delivering ultimatum after ultimatum. Here's the thing about property disputes, and this is your first legal nugget. Always get a professional survey before you battle an HOA. Many properties that were grandfathered in before HOA creation aren't actually subject to their restrictions. Your deed trumps their rules if you were there first. So I pulled my deed, hired a surveyor, and guess what? My property was technically outside their HOA boundaries. The bridge wasn't subject to their rules, their approval, or their aesthetics committee. But Maggie Thornfield didn't care about little things like property law or legal boundaries. She wanted that bridge gone, and she was just getting started. Maggie's next move was straight out of the Karen playbook. If you can't win legally, weaponize the bureaucracy. She organized a campaign of concerned neighbors to file complaints with county code enforcement. Suddenly, my bridge was an unsafe structure, an environmental hazard, and apparently it was attracting vagrants. The complaints were complete fiction. But here's how the system works. Every complaint triggers an investigation. So one Tuesday morning, I'm back home from DC, and there's a county inspector walking around my bridge with a clipboard. Nice guy named Carlos, very professional, clearly knew his stuff. "Sir, I have to investigate every complaint we receive," he told me, "but between you and me, this bridge is better built than most modern ones I inspect." Carlos spent 2 hours going over every beam, every joint, every support. His final report? No violations. 0. In fact, he noted that the bridge exceeded current safety standards and showed exceptional craftsmanship, consistent with Depression-era construction techniques. But Maggie wasn't done. She started working the social pressure angle. Suddenly, I'm persona non grata at the country club. Stan's dealership, where I'd been getting my ranch truck serviced for 3 years, was suddenly too busy to fit me into their schedule. The local diner owner, who used to cater my small ranch gatherings, became mysteriously unavailable every time I called. The smell of small-town politics is like burnt coffee, bitter and hard to get out of your nose. Then came the personal attack, and that's when I knew this wasn't really about the bridge. I'm at the grocery store, minding my own business in the cereal aisle, when I hear Maggie's voice behind me. She's talking loud enough for half the store to hear, telling her friend about that federal judge who thinks he's above local rules. But then she said something that made my blood run cold. Maybe if he spent less time playing pioneer and more time in civilization, his wife would still be alive. My hand started shaking so hard I nearly dropped the box of cornflakes. Rage tastes like copper pennies, and I had a mouth full of it. But I'm a federal judge. I don't get the luxury of losing my temper in public, no matter how much someone deserves it. Mrs. Chen was 2 aisles over. She heard everything and called me that evening. "Judge Morrison, what that woman said was cruel and wrong. She's been telling people your bridge is dangerous, but everyone knows she just wants to control everything she can see from her fancy house." That's when I realized this wasn't about property values or community standards. This was about power. Maggie Thornfield had built her identity around controlling other people, and I represented something she couldn't control. Someone who actually knew their rights and had the resources to fight back. Time for my first counterpunch. I quietly ordered a professional structural engineering report on the bridge. Cost me $1,500, but it was worth every penny. The engineers confirmed what Carlos had found. The bridge not only met modern safety standards, it exceeded them. Better yet, they noted the historical significance of the construction techniques and recommended the bridge for preservation as an example of Depression-era rule craftsmanship with significant educational value. But here's what really mattered. I started documenting everything. Every phone call, every letter, every interaction. I bought a digital recorder and started carrying it everywhere. And here's your second legal nugget. Colorado is a one-party consent state, which means you can record any conversation you're part of without the other person's knowledge. 38 states have similar laws, and it's one of the most powerful tools you can have in a legal dispute. Your phone can be your best legal weapon when dealing with bullies. I also started researching Maggie and Stan Thornfield. Public records are amazing things when you know where to look. Property records, business licenses, court filings, tax liens. It's all there if you're patient enough to dig. And what I found was very, very interesting. The anonymous letter showed up on a Thursday. Plain envelope, block letters, no signature. Accidents happen to stubborn judges. Drop this bridge thing before something bad happens. That same week, I found my tire slashed in the courthouse parking garage in DC. Could have been random vandalism, but I don't believe in coincidences. When you're a federal judge, threats take on a whole different meaning. We're trained to recognize escalation patterns, and this had all the hallmarks of someone crossing the line from property dispute into potential federal crimes. I made a quiet call to a colleague at the FBI, not to file a complaint, not yet, but to let them know the situation was escalating. Sometimes the best defense is making sure the right people know what's happening before it gets worse. Maggie Thornfield had no idea she'd just started a fight with someone who had the entire federal justice system as backup. Maggie's next play was pure small-town corruption. She leveraged Stan's political donations to get the county commissioners involved. Stan had been writing checks to local politicians for years, and now it was time to call in those favors. An emergency county commission meeting was called to discuss problem properties incompatible with community development standards. Guess whose ranch was specifically mentioned in the agenda? The local newspaper, which coincidentally received heavy advertising dollars from Stan's dealership, ran an editorial about entitled judges who think federal appointments put them above local law. The political pressure was one thing, but then Maggie tried the environmental angle. She filed a complaint with the state environmental agency, claiming my bridge was disrupting natural creek flow and causing significant wetland damage and fish habitat destruction. The state sent out an inspector, a professional woman named Sarah, who actually knew what she was talking about. She spent half a day measuring water flow, taking photographs, and analyzing the creek ecosystem around the bridge. "Mr. Morrison," she told me, "I've inspected hundreds of creek crossings, and this is actually a model of low-impact construction. Your grandfather understood water flow better than most modern engineers." But here's where Maggie's desperation started working against her. While I was researching her background, I discovered some very interesting facts about the Thornfield finances. Stan's dealership owed $47,000 in back taxes to the county. Maggie's real estate license had 3 active ethics violations under review by the state board. And that county commissioner, who was suddenly so concerned about my property, he'd been taking donations from Stan for 6 years without properly disclosing the potential conflict of interest. The smell of hypocrisy is like rotting fish. It gets stronger the longer you ignore it. Meanwhile, Maggie escalated to social media warfare. She created a Facebook group called Concerned Citizens of Sunset Hills and started posting photos of my bridge with inflammatory captions like "Federal judge refuses to follow local rules" and "Your tax dollars pay his salary while he flaunts community standards." The group grew to 400 members in 2 weeks, mostly people who'd never seen my property but loved online outrage. The comments ranged from reasonable concerns to outright threats. Someone should make him comply, and judges need to learn they're not above the law. That's when I decided it was time for my second counterpunch. I quietly contacted my FBI colleague about the escalating threats against a federal judge. The Bureau takes threats against federal officials very seriously, and they began monitoring Maggie's social media activities and cross-referencing her associates with known extremist groups. My background in environmental law, I taught it for 5 years before going on the bench, helped me prepare a comprehensive counter-analysis. I commissioned a professional creek flow study from the same firm the state uses for environmental impact assessments. Cost me $3,000, but the results were devastating to Maggie's claims. The study showed that my bridge actually improved water management by preventing erosion and providing habitat for local wildlife. The original stone foundations, built by my grandfather, created small pools that were perfect spawning areas for native trout. Far from damaging the environment, the bridge was actually enhancing it. Here's your third legal nugget. Many HOA disputes can be completely flipped by proving your property is more environmentally sound than the alternatives they're proposing. Green solutions often trump HOA preferences and can actually get you government support instead of government hassle. But the real mini-twist came when I started digging deeper into the Thornfield's activities. The harassment was escalating on my end, but I wasn't the only target. I found court records showing Maggie had been involved in similar disputes in 2 previous neighborhoods. Same pattern: identify a property she didn't like, organize community pressure, make the owners' lives miserable until they sold and moved away. She wasn't just a difficult neighbor, she was a serial property predator. The vandalism escalated too. My mailbox got smashed with a baseball bat. Someone spray-painted TYRAT in red letters across my ranch gate. Mrs. Chen started reporting strange cars driving slowly past my property late at night, always with tinted windows, always slowing down at the bridge. Deputy Rodriguez, a good guy who'd been patrolling our area for 8 years, increased his rounds and gave me his personal cell number. "Judge, this is getting out of hand," he told me. "These people are crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed." The final straw came when I returned from a week-long federal court session in D.C. Orange plastic survey stakes had been driven all around my property line like surrender flags. Maggie had hired a private surveyor, different from the county's official surveyor, who was claiming my property boundaries were completely wrong. The sound of those plastic flags fluttering in the Colorado wind should have been innocent. Instead, it sounded like a declaration of war. Maggie's next escalation was pure legal warfare. She hired Richard Blackstone, a $500 an hour attorney from Denver with a reputation for ruthless property disputes. The lawsuit papers were served while I was presiding over a major federal racketeering case. Talk about ironic timing. The lawsuit claimed my bridge violated implied easement agreements and demanded $50,000 in community damages plus immediate bridge removal. The legal theory was creative, I'll give them that, but it had more holes than Swiss cheese. Meanwhile, Stan was working the financial pressure angle. His dealership filed a mechanic's lien on my ranch truck for unpaid repairs. Repairs I never authorized, work that was never done, bills I never received. It was completely fraudulent, but liens tie up your property until you can get them removed through the court system. The harassment went corporate. The local bank where Stan conveniently sat on the board of directors suddenly decided my ranch mortgage needed a routine review of terms and conditions. My property insurance company started receiving anonymous complaints about bridge safety, triggering mandatory inspections and threatening coverage cancellation. You could taste the corruption in the air like metallic dust after a thunderstorm. But here's where Maggie's desperation led to a massive tactical error. The lawsuit filing contained factual errors that were easily disproven. Blackstone claimed my grandfather never owned certain parcels that were clearly documented in county records going back 60 years. Either he didn't do his due diligence, or Maggie had fed him completely false information. That's when I realized something important. She was paying these legal fees from somewhere, and it sure wasn't her personal checking account. A little digging into HOA financial records, which members have a legal right to examine, revealed that Maggie was using the HOA emergency fund to pay for her personal vendetta. That's not just unethical, it's embezzlement. The community manipulation reached peak absurdity when Maggie organized a town hall meeting about problem properties in our county. She packed the meeting with HOA supporters, Stan provided free transportation in dealership vans, and they came armed with emotional testimony about how my bridge was somehow endangering their children. My kids can't play safely knowing there's that dangerous structure so close to our neighborhood, sobbed one woman who lived 3 miles away and had probably never seen my property. The reasonable neighbors, people who actually knew the bridge's history and value, were intimidated into silence by this coordinated campaign. It's amazing how quickly mob mentality can overwhelm common sense. Time for my counterpunch, and this one was going to hurt. I filed a comprehensive countersuit for harassment, defamation, and fraudulent liens. But I didn't go to some local attorney who might be intimidated by the Thornfield's connections. I called Maria Santos, one of the top civil rights attorneys in Colorado, recommended by a federal court colleague. Maria took one look at the case and her eyes lit up. Judge Morrison, this isn't just harassment. This is a coordinated conspiracy to deprive a federal judge of his constitutional rights. I'll take this case pro bono because when they attack you, they're attacking the judicial system itself. While Maria prepared the legal offensive, I hired a forensic accountant to trace exactly how Maggie was funding her war against me. The trail led through HOA emergency funds, Stan's business accounts, and some very questionable consulting fees paid to shell company. The sensory memory that sticks with me from those late nights is the leather smell of law books mixed with cold coffee as I researched easement law until 2 a.m. The satisfying sound of my printer churning out evidence. Hundreds of pages documenting their conspiracy. Here's your 4th legal nugget. Using HOA community funds for personal vendettas is embezzlement, plain and simple. It's a criminal offense that can result in felony charges. Always demand HOA financial transparency. Members have a legal right to see the books, and you'd be amazed what you'll find when you actually look. But Maggie wasn't done escalating. She sent an anonymous letter to my federal court supervisor claiming I was using my judicial position for personal gain in local disputes. It was a baseless complaint. But any allegation against a federal judge triggers a mandatory ethics investigation. For 2 weeks, my court schedule was disrupted while investigators interviewed neighbors, reviewed court records, and analyzed my conduct. The investigation concluded I'd acted with complete propriety, but the stress and professional embarrassment were exactly what Maggie intended. They weren't just attacking my property anymore, they were attacking my career, my reputation, everything I'd worked 30 years to build. That's when my research uncovered something that changed everything. Stan Thornfield's car dealership was under federal investigation for loan fraud. Maggie's own property had major septic system violations that should have triggered state environmental action years ago. And Mrs. Chen had been sitting on crucial information about my bridge that she'd been afraid to share. Until now. Mrs. Chen knocked on my door on a rainy Thursday evening, holding a manila envelope that looked like it had been stored in an attic for decades. Her hands were shaking as she handed it to me. Judge Morrison, I should have given you this months ago, but I was scared of that Thornfield woman. But what she said about your wife, that was evil. Your grandfather saved my family, and it's time I returned the favor. Inside that envelope was a piece of American history I never knew existed. The bridge didn't just sit on any old creek crossing. It was built on the exact location of the original 1880s stagecoach route that connected Denver to the mining camps in the mountains. My grandfather hadn't chosen that spot randomly. He'd built his bridge where travelers had been crossing Willow Creek for nearly a century. But that was just the beginning. Mrs. Chen had copies of county records showing an underground utility easement running directly under the bridge. Gas lines, water mains, electrical conduits. Removing the bridge would require rerouting utilities at a cost of over $200,000, and guess who would be liable for that expense? The HOA that demanded the removal. The historical bombshell came next. The county historian confirmed that my bridge was eligible for National Historic Registry listing. Depression-era rural construction techniques, documented community significance, and the original stagecoach route location made it a slam dunk for federal protection under the National Historic Preservation Act. Judge, they weren't just attacking your bridge, Mrs. Chen said, her voice trembling with emotion. They were attacking a piece of American history. But the financial discoveries were even more damaging to Maggie's position. My forensic accountant had uncovered a pattern of corruption that went way beyond misusing HOA funds. Stan Thornfield owed the HOA $23,000 in unpaid fees that Maggie had quietly waived while aggressively pursuing collection action against other members. The HOA emergency fund that was being used to pay for Maggie's legal war against me, it was below the required legal minimums mandated by Colorado HOA law. Several major expenditures had been approved without proper member voting, and the financial records showed clear evidence of self-dealing and conflicts of interest. Here's where it gets really interesting. The environmental investigation I'd commissioned revealed that Maggie's own property was causing significantly more environmental damage than my bridge ever could. Her decorative pond and extensive landscaping had redirected natural creek flow in ways that were actually dangerous. During heavy rains, the altered drainage patterns were causing erosion and flooding downstream. The state environmental agency had grounds to cite Maggie's property, not mine. Mrs. Chen saved the most important revelation for last. She pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1965 showing my grandfather's bridge during the worst flood in county history. The bridge had been the only crossing point that remained safe when the main roads were washed out. 3 families were evacuated to safety across that bridge, including Mrs. Chen's parents. Your grandfather was a hero, Judge Morrison. That bridge saved lives. It's not just family history, it's community history. The power dynamic had completely shifted. Instead of defending my property rights, I was now in position to go on the offensive, using federal resources, environmental protection, and historical preservation laws. Maggie Thornfield had picked a fight with someone who had access to the FBI, environmental agencies, the National Park Service, and federal prosecutors. She'd escalated a simple property dispute into a federal civil rights case involving conspiracy, corruption, and potential criminal charges. The predator had finally chosen the wrong prey, and she was about to find out exactly what that meant. Time to assemble the dream team. Maria Santos brought in David Kim, an environmental law specialist who'd fought the EPA and won. My FBI colleague connected me with federal civil rights prosecutor Janet Murphy, who specialized in conspiracy cases. Professor Williams, the county historian, agreed to serve as our expert witness on the bridge's historical significance. And Mrs. Chen? She became our community organizer, quietly reaching out to the reasonable neighbors who'd been intimidated into silence by Maggie's mob tactics. Our legal strategy was like a three-pronged military assault. First, the federal civil rights lawsuit under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. That's the law that protects citizens from deprivation of rights under color of authority. When HOAs start acting like government agencies, they become subject to federal civil rights laws. Maria was salivating at the prospect of taking this to federal court. Second, state criminal referrals for HOA fund embezzlement, fraudulent liens, and conspiracy. The forensic accountant had found enough evidence to keep a prosecutor busy for months. Third, environmental counterclaims against Maggie's property violations, plus a historic preservation application to protect the bridge permanently under federal law. The forensic accountant I hired was a former IRS agent named Thomas Burke, who could follow money trails like a bloodhound follows scent. What he uncovered was even worse than I'd imagined. Stan's dealership was using HOA connections to generate business through kickback schemes. Maggie had received over $15,000 in consulting fees from developers who wanted to buy ranch properties in the area. The corruption went deeper than a septic tank and smelled twice as bad. While our legal team prepared for war, we gathered evidence like we were building a federal RICO case. Professional photographers documented every detail of the bridge's craftsmanship. A structural engineer provided analysis showing the bridge exceeded modern safety codes by significant margins. An environmental scientist measured actual creek impact and proved the bridge was beneficial to local ecology. A computer forensics expert recovered deleted social media posts and emails from Maggie's accounts. Turns out, she'd been coordinating with other HOA presidents to share strategies for dealing with problem homeowners. The digital trail was like reading a manual for organized harassment. Here are the legal nuggets that can save you from similar situations. Federal civil rights protection exists when HOAs act like government agencies. 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 protects against deprivation of rights under color of law, and that includes HOA overreach. Your takeaway: HOAs acting like government agencies can face federal civil rights lawsuits. Historic preservation provides permanent property protection. National Historic Registry listing gives you federal backing against demolition demands. Your takeaway: historical significance can permanently shield property from HOA. Forensic accounting reveals the truth about HOA corruption. Professional financial analysis often uncovers embezzlement and improper spending that members never authorized. Your takeaway: follow the money. HOA corruption usually leaves paper trails. The community organizing happened in secret meetings at Mrs. Chen's kitchen table, the smell of jasmine tea mixing with the sound of whispered conversations. We discovered that 60% of HOA members had never supported bridge removal. Maggie had manipulated voting procedures and suppressed opposition through intimidation. The plan was to call an emergency HOA meeting with proper legal notice, something Maggie had been avoiding for months. Our media strategy was simple but effective. Sarah Martinez, an investigative reporter from the local paper, was very interested in the corruption angle. A story about harassment of a federal judge had statewide appeal. Plus, the environmental protection and historical preservation angles would attract conservation groups. David Vai's Goliath stories are catnip for sympathetic media coverage. While the legal team worked, I coordinated with federal resources that most people don't even know exist. The FBI was monitoring the threats against me as part of their federal judge protection program. The U.S. Attorney's Office was reviewing the case for potential federal prosecution. Federal marshals were briefed on the situation in case security became an issue. Having the full weight of federal law enforcement backing you up feels like calling in the cavalry when you're surrounded by hostile forces. Technical preparation was crucial. A new survey crew re-established exact property boundaries, confirming my property was outside HOA jurisdiction. The title company provided comprehensive ownership history going back to territorial days. An engineering firm designed historical markers and interpretive signs for the bridge site. We even prepared an environmental restoration plan that would make the bridge area a showcase for sustainable construction and historical preservation. The psychological preparation was just as important. We anticipated Maggie's likely responses: escalation, playing the victim, lawyer threats, media smear campaigns. We prepared for social media attacks and had exit strategies if she tried to negotiate. But honestly, after what she'd put me through, the personal attacks, the threats, the assault on my professional reputation, I wasn't in a negotiating mood. We weren't just building a legal case. We were orchestrating a masterpiece of justice, with every piece positioned for maximum impact when the moment came to reveal our hand. Maggie must have gotten wind of my investigation through the lawyer gossip network, because her next moves reeked of pure panic. You could smell the desperation through her expensive perfume when she called an emergency meeting with Stan and attorney Blackstone at the country club. Their decision? Go nuclear before I could act. If they couldn't win legally, they'd destroy the bridge through sheer force and deal with the consequences later. I was back in D.C. for a federal court session when the contractors showed up at dawn. Mrs. Chen called 911, then immediately called me. Judge Morrison, they're tearing down your bridge right now. There's a demolition crew with chainsaws and everything. The mini-twist came when Deputy Rodriguez arrived and found the contractors waving around what looked like an official court order. But Rodriguez is no fool. He'd been a cop for 15 years and knew fake paperwork when he saw it. The emergency demolition order was printed on regular copy paper with a forged judge signature. "Sir, I'm going to need to see an original court order with proper seals," Rodriguez told the crew chief. "This looks like something you printed at Kinko's." When Rodriguez called the county courthouse, guess what? No active court orders for bridge demolition existed. The contractors realized they'd been duped and refused to continue without legitimate authorization. Maggie's desperation had led to her first major tactical error, attempted fraud involving forged court documents. But Stan wasn't done making bad decisions. He approached Deputy Rodriguez privately that afternoon and offered a campaign contribution if the sheriff's department would stop interfering with community improvement projects. What Stan didn't know was that Rodriguez had been recording their conversation. Colorado law enforcement officers are trained to document potential corruption, and attempted bribery of a police officer is a felony that carries serious prison time. Meanwhile, Maggie's smear campaign went into overdrive. She leaked a story to the local newspaper claiming a federal judge uses his position to intimidate ordinary neighbors. The social media attacks intensified with posts about corrupt judges who think they're above the law. Anonymous flyers appeared around town claiming my bridge was a safety hazard that could collapse and kill children. The sound of my phone buzzing with updates felt like a war room communications center. Every few hours brought news of another desperate illegal action by the Thornfield team. But here's the beautiful thing about desperate people. They make mistakes. Every illegal action they took was another felony charge for the federal prosecutor's file. The forged court order triggered a federal investigation for document fraud. Stan's attempted bribery created a state criminal case. The ongoing harassment campaign against a federal judge brought in the FBI's Civil Rights Unit. Every desperate move they made was another nail in their legal coffin. The community pressure was building too, but not in the way Maggie expected. Reasonable HOA members were horrified by the escalating tactics. A secret petition began circulating, demanding Maggie's immediate resignation. Stan's car dealership faced a customer boycott organized by bridge supporters. Local businesses started distancing themselves from anything connected to Thornfield influence. The financial pressure was mounting on their end as well. My forensic accountant Burke had presented his evidence to the state attorney general's office. The HOA's insurance company canceled their liability policy due to reckless leadership decisions. Stan's dealership was facing a federal investigation for loan fraud that could shut down his business permanently. Legal fees were mounting faster than snow in a Colorado blizzard. Attorney Blackstone demanded a $50,000 retainer to continue representation, but the HOA emergency fund was tapped out from previous expenditures. The personal stakes escalated when the harassment followed me to Washington. Someone vandalized my D.C. apartment building with graffiti targeting federal judges. The threats had crossed state lines, making it a federal crime with serious prison time attached. Federal marshals increased my security protection, and my court cases required extra security due to the ongoing harassment campaign. They had crossed the line from property dispute to attacking the federal judiciary itself. But while Maggie and Stan were making desperate moves and criminal mistakes, I was maintaining judicial restraint and letting them dig their own graves. Every false accusation was documented and added to the federal case file. Every illegal action was recorded and preserved as evidence. Patience in the face of injustice isn't weakness, it's preparation, and we were very well prepared. The setup for our final confrontation was falling into place. An emergency HOA meeting had been scheduled due to member petition. Maggie tried to cancel it, but her legal counsel advised that member-demanded meetings must proceed under Colorado law. The media had been alerted to a dramatic confrontation between a federal judge and corrupt HOA leadership. All our evidence packages were prepared for simultaneous release to prosecutors, reporters, and the public. The moment of reckoning was finally at hand. Maggie's final gambit was hiring a private investigator to dig up dirt on my judicial record. She was convinced that 30 years of legal practice and 12 years on the federal bench must contain some scandal she could exploit. The desperation in her voice was palpable through the phone recordings we obtained. She sounded like a drowning woman grasping for driftwood. The PI investigation backfired spectacularly. After 3 weeks of digging through my professional history, interviewing former colleagues, and reviewing court records, he found exactly nothing. My judicial record was cleaner than a freshly washed window. Stellar reputation, community service, ethical conduct, the kind of boring professional life that corrupt people can't understand. But Maggie wasn't done embarrassing herself. She launched a false flag operation with anonymous 911 calls reporting suspicious activity at my ranch, claimed I was building illegal structures and conducting environmental violations. The pattern of false reporting became so obvious that multiple agencies started comparing notes. Sheriff's Department, code enforcement, environmental inspectors, they all found the same thing. No violations, no problems, just a well-maintained property with a historically significant bridge. The constant false alarms were wasting taxpayer resources, and everyone knew exactly who was behind them. The legal system manipulation reached peak absurdity when Maggie tried to forum shop by filing identical lawsuits in different counties. She claimed my bridge somehow affected interstate commerce to trigger federal jurisdiction, apparently not realizing that I'm already a federal judge who knows exactly how jurisdiction works. Attorney Blackstone finally realized he was being used for frivolous litigation that could result in professional sanctions. When the state bar started asking questions about multiple identical filings, he withdrew representation faster than a cat fleeing a dog. Maggie's media manipulation was equally desperate. She staged concerned citizen interviews with the local TV station, bringing fake supporters paid from HOA funds to create crowd scenes. She even hired a professional media consultant, again using community money, for her personal vendetta. The mini twist came when Maggie filed a complaint with the Federal Judicial Conduct Board, claiming I was using my position to intimidate HOA members. It was a complete Hail Mary pass, but any complaint against a federal judge triggers a mandatory investigation. Here's the beautiful irony. The judicial conduct investigation quickly revealed the pattern of harassment against me, not misconduct by me. The federal board referred the case to the FBI for investigation of false accusations against a sitting judge, another felony charge for Maggie's growing collection. While Maggie was making increasingly desperate and illegal moves, I maintained the strategic patience that had served me well on the bench. Every false accusation was documented and added to our federal case file. Every illegal action was recorded and preserved as evidence. The community reached its breaking point when the local newspaper published an investigative series on HOA corruption. Financial records revealed $89,000 in questionable expenditures. Multiple HOA members demanded an emergency audit and immediate leadership change. The petition for Maggie's removal reached 75% of HOA membership. Stan's house of cards was collapsing too. His dealership faced federal loan fraud charges that could result in criminal prosecution and business closure. Maggie's real estate license was permanently revoked for ethics violations. Their marriage was straining under the pressure of mounting legal bills and criminal investigations. The sweet smell of karma filled the air like fresh mountain pine. The financial consequences were devastating. The HOA faced potential bankruptcy from legal fees and lawsuit settlements. Their insurance company denied coverage for criminal acts by leadership. Stan's personal assets were frozen, pending federal investigation. Success built on bullying others is always temporary, and the Thornfields were learning that lesson the hard way. Federal law enforcement was now fully engaged. The U.S. Attorney's Office unsealed criminal indictments for conspiracy, fraud, bribery, and harassment of a federal judge. FBI agents raided Stan's dealership and HOA offices simultaneously. seizing computers, financial records, and communication devices. The sound of handcuffs clicking was sweeter than any symphony I'd ever heard. Here's your final legal nugget. False reporting to government agencies becomes criminal harassment when it's part of a pattern, and multiple false 911 calls can trigger federal charges for misuse of emergency services. Government resources aren't weapons for personal disputes. Misuse brings serious consequences. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled with proper legal notice, court reporters hired for transparency, and media credentials verified. All our evidence packages were prepared for simultaneous distribution to prosecutors, reporters, and the public. I was returning from Washington, D.C. for the final confrontation, with federal law enforcement providing security presence and community supporters organized for peaceful demonstration of democratic process. After months of playing defense against illegal harassment, intimidation, and corruption, it was finally time to present our case to the community and let justice run its course. The predators had become the prey, and hunting season was officially open. The Sunset Hills Community Center had never seen anything like it. Cars packed the parking lot and lined the streets for 3 blocks. Local media vans, federal reporters, concerned citizens, curiosity seekers, and HOA members filled every available space. The air crackled with tension like electricity before a Colorado thunderstorm. Inside, the meeting room was standing room only. Court reporter positioned at the front table, security personnel discreetly stationed around the perimeter, cameras rolling from multiple news outlets. This wasn't just an HOA meeting. It was a public trial. Maggie tried to control the proceedings from the moment she called the meeting to order. She attempted to exclude media and non-HOA members, claiming it was a private community matter. Her voice had that shrill quality of someone who knows they're about to lose everything. I calmly requested the floor and presented my credentials as both a property owner and sitting federal judge. The room fell silent as I introduced legal counsel Maria Santos, who presented a formal motion for Maggie's immediate removal from all HOA positions. The look of panic in her eyes when she realized this wasn't her show anymore was worth every sleepless night she'd cost me. Our forensic accountant, Thomas Burke, stepped to the podium with a laptop and projector. The evidence hit the screen like hammer blows. $89,000 in unauthorized expenditures, misuse of emergency funds, Stan's unpaid HOA fees while others faced aggressive collection, spreadsheets, bank records, canceled checks, all displayed in living color for the entire community to see. The visual impact was devastating. You could hear people gasping as the scope of financial corruption became clear. Sheriff Deputy Rodriguez took the microphone next and testified about Stan's attempted bribery. FBI agent Wilson presented evidence of the coordinated harassment campaign against a federal judge. Forged court documents were displayed on screen while the contractors who'd been deceived testified about the deception. Each piece of evidence hit like a precision strike against their credibility. Professor Williams presented the bridge's historical significance with maps, photographs, and documentation. Original 1,880s stagecoach route surveys, stories of my grandfather's heroic flood rescues, the approved National Historic Registry application. If federal protection was now permanent and legally bulletproof. The emotional impact was immediate. This wasn't just about property rights. It was about community history, American heritage, and honoring the people who built our foundations. Environmental scientist Dr. Sarah Kim presented her creek flow analysis with before and after photos. The bridge actually improved water management and prevented erosion, while Maggie's property modifications had created dangerous downstream flooding. State environmental violations against the Thornfield property were officially filed during the meeting. Mrs. Chen stepped to the microphone with tears in her eyes and spoke about my grandfather's character and the bridge's life-saving importance. Multiple neighbors testified about Maggie's systematic harassment and intimidation tactics. The petition signed by 60% of HOA members opposing bridge removal was presented as evidence of manipulated voting procedures. The community found its voice after months of intimidation and fear. Then came the mic drop moment that I'd been waiting months to deliver. I stood up, opened a thick folder, and addressed the room in my courtroom voice. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the federal civil rights lawsuit filed today against Margaret Thornfield, and Stanley Thornfield for conspiracy to deprive a federal judge of constitutional rights. The room erupted. Camera flashes popped like fireworks as federal marshals stepped forward with arrest warrants. Criminal indictments were unsealed for fraud, bribery, embezzlement, and harassment of a federal judge. Ladies and gentlemen, meet your new defendants. Maggie's face went white as she realized federal marshals were present to execute arrest warrants. Stan tried to slip out the back door but found his exit blocked by FBI agents. The sound of handcuffs clicking echoed through the shocked silence of the community center. HOA insurance company representatives stood up to announce that liability coverage was immediately canceled due to criminal acts by leadership. An emergency management board would be appointed to prevent HOA bankruptcy and protect homeowner investments. The media circus was instant and overwhelming. Local reporters, national news crews, and social media influencers captured every moment of the arrests. Federal judge vindicated in HOA corruption case would be the headline in papers across Colorado by morning. The community response was a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. People were crying, cheering, and applauding not just for my vindication, but for the triumph of truth over corruption, justice over intimidation. Emergency voting removed Maggie from all HOA positions unanimously. Even her former allies abandoned ship faster than rats fleeing a sinking vessel. New leadership was elected on a platform of transparency, accountability, and respect for property rights. Justice served tastes better when the whole community witnesses it, and this community had front-row seats to watch corruption get exactly what it deserved. The federal charges resulted in plea agreements that sent shockwaves through HOA communities across Colorado. Maggie received 18 months in federal prison for conspiracy and embezzlement. Stan got 12 months for bribery and fraud. Their luxury lifestyle evaporated faster than morning dew in the desert sun. The civil lawsuit settled for $275,000, plus comprehensive HOA policy changes that protect homeowner rights and ensure financial transparency. New leadership implemented member protections that prevent future harassment campaigns and require supermajority votes for any legal action. My bridge received official National Historic Registry designation, complete with interpretive signage explaining its significance to the original stagecoach route and my grandfather's role in community history. Federal protection means no HOA can ever threaten it again. But the real victory was what grew from the ashes of that conflict. The annual Heritage Bridge Festival brings hundreds of visitors to celebrate local history and Depression-era craftsmanship. Local schools use the bridge as an outdoor classroom for history and engineering lessons. What started as an attack on my family legacy became a celebration of community heritage that benefits everyone. Personally, I found something I didn't expect: peace. The ranch remains my sanctuary, but now the bridge represents resilience rather than conflict. Evening walks across those familiar wooden planks carry the sound of laughter from school groups and the satisfaction of justice well served. The relationships forged during this battle became lasting friendships. Mrs. Chen and I share weekly dinners, swapping stories about my grandfather and her parents. The reasonable neighbors who found their voices during the crisis became a close-knit community that watches out for each other. Sometimes you have to fight for what matters to discover what truly matters. The social good that emerged from this conflict continues to grow. I established the Rural Heritage Protection Fund using part of the lawsuit settlement, providing legal assistance for property owners facing HOA overreach. The scholarship program supports students studying environmental law and historic preservation, training the next generation to protect what previous generations built. Our legal clinic has resolved over 40 HOA disputes without litigation, proving that knowledge and mediation prevent most conflicts from escalating to courtroom battles. Education beats intimidation every single time. The systemic changes reached far beyond Sunset Hills. Colorado's legislature passed the HOA Accountability Act, requiring financial transparency, member voting rights, and protection against harassment. Federal guidelines were updated to better protect judges from coordinated campaigns. Model policies developed from our case help communities nationwide balance development with historic preservation. One bridge saved became a blueprint for protecting everyone's property rights. Here are the key takeaways that can protect you from similar harassment. Know your property boundaries through professional surveys. They prevent costly disputes, document everything with photos, recordings, and written records. Your phone is a powerful legal tool. Federal civil rights laws protect against conspiracy and harassment when groups act like government agencies. Historic designation provides permanent property protection that trumps HOA preferences. HOA financial transparency is your legal right. Demand to see the books and question every expenditure. The most important lesson is that reasonable people outnumber bullies when given the chance to speak up. Professional mediation prevents escalation better than confrontation. Historical preservation benefits entire communities, not just individual property owners. Democracy works when people participate instead of letting others make decisions for them. Today I'm writing this story while sitting on my grandfather's bridge, listening to Willow Creek flow beneath the wooden planks that have carried 3 generations of my family. The gentle creak of the wood mingles with the sound of children's voices from a school tour, learning about American history in the place where it actually happened. The bridge that Maggie Thornfield tried to destroy now serves hundreds of people every year as a symbol of heritage, resilience, and the power of standing up for what's right. Some battles choose you. The measure of character is how you fight them. Speaking of choosing battles, wait until you hear what happened to my neighbor when the HOA tried to ban his vegetable garden because it attracted wildlife. That story involves the EPA, 3 federal agencies, and a very angry environmental lawyer who happened to specialize in food justice. But that's a story for next time, and trust me, it involves even more dramatic courtroom moments and federal intervention. Drop a comment below and share your own HOA horror story. I read every single one, and some of them might become future videos. If you enjoyed seeing justice served with a side of legal education, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because David versus Goliath stories happen more often than you think, and I'm here to share every single victory